Today, the Republicans unveiled their new Pledge to America. We went to Capitol Hill to get you the inside story. First, House Minority Whip Eric Cantor goes on the record. Congressman, nice to see you, sir.
Good to be with you always, Greta.
Well, I think you guys are drawing blood. I'll tell you why. Because former President Bill Clinton responded to the new pledge that you made today, and he referred to the Republican, your pledge, and other Republicans as hysterical tirades against government. And he called the pledge an ideological document and warned that it would be implemented at the expense of America's middle class.
Let's just say maybe that's predictable coming from Bill Clinton. Greta, the Pledge to America was a result of a 6, 7, 8 months process where the Republicans in the House went out to listen to the people because we understand that the people in this country feel very disconnected from their government. And we unveiled the Pledge to America today in the hopes that we can begin, just to begin to right the ship, if you will. You know, the balance between the government and the private sector has become so altered to the point that many Americans don't recognize what's going on. And you put that in combination with their own circumstances of being out of work for so long, or at least knowing some that are, it makes it very difficult for people to have any confidence in anyone. So we tried to put together a very sensical document that sets forth a set of principles around which we fashion solutions to deal with the economic problems facing people, as well as the reform needs confronting Washington.
Before we get to the actual parts of the pledge, let me ask you this. What's the enforcement? I mean, how do American people, how certain are they that you're actually going to keep your pledge? Is the enforcement only 2 years from now when, if you haven't kept it, should you get the majority, they'll throw you out? Is that the only enforcement?
You know, Greta, I hope that this is really the beginning of a discussion with the American people. You know, I know that we Republicans aim to want to be in those kitchen table conversations with people so that we are interacting. You and I know we've talked about our U-Cut program. This program that produced this document of a Pledge to America was very interactive. We heard from people. We listened. So I'm hopeful that there is an ongoing accountability measure. We intend to confront, if we're lucky enough to assume majority, accountability in our actions, that the public can and should hold us accountable for all that we intend to do. And that's why you've seen an attempt to try and be a very reasoned party in this document. And because I think at the root of it all, of all the frustration out there, Greta, is that Americans are tired of politicians who continue to promise things they can't deliver.
We mentioned the aspect of promise, and I've been critical of the Democrats, and so they're bringing up the whole issue of the tax cut, the extension of the tax cuts now on the eve of midterms, and we've known that they're going to expire come January. That could have been discussed before. You've got the DREAM Act to help a certain segment of the population attached to the defense authorization bill. Now today, you and other Republicans go to a small business and all of a sudden unveil this. Where you been is basically, or why now, and why is that not just sort of the same sort of criticism as a stunt on the eve of the midterms?
Greta, if you look at the proposals in the documents, we have been about these proposals for some time. We have been engaged in conversation with people, asking them what they thought of our stimulus plan, because our stimulus plan was focused on small business help and providing tax relief to small businesses. That's in our plan.
So is this just sort of a formalization, and I don't mean to step on you and take yours, is this sort of a formalization of what you have been doing? It's just sort of making a formal pledge? Is that what you think?
No, because we listened to the people in all of this. We had some proposals that we had been forming along the way over the last 20 months, as you know, as a result of an agenda being promoted by the Obama administration and the Pelosi majority that really was outside the mainstream of what most people wanted, because it didn't speak to the real essence of what America is in terms of private sector prosperity. And we went out and discussed those things. And in the Pledge to America, we set forth a preamble. And that preamble talks about our principles and the commitment that we're going to have to free markets, to fiscal discipline, to strong national defense, and to the other things that I think Americans innately understand is behind the real success of this country.
Is this different from the last time the Republicans had the majority majority in the House? I mean, is this a different deal, a different program, or something different you're giving Americans?
Well, it is a pledge to America because it sets forth a set of principles that we intend to live by. And we are committing ourselves to those principles. And then we say, these are the first steps. This is not the be-all that ends all. These are the first steps that we intend to deliver so that we respond to the priorities of the American people right now, which is to get people back to work. And really, this is a governing document that could be put into place right now if the Speaker would go ahead and call some of these items up. You know, as we've heard a lot about uncertainty plaguing working families and small businesses. One of the biggest causes of that uncertainty is the overhang of what the tax rates are going to be.
Which brings me to the issue of the tax cuts. I know this isn't your control, but we're not likely to see a vote on that before Election Day. Probably more likely between Election Day, the lame duck session. Is that your thinking? Is that?
We continue to ask Speaker Pelosi to listen to the American people and to listen to a bipartisan majority in the House, because really there's a bipartisan majority now that supports making sure no taxes are hiked.
Meaning those above $250,000 also maintain that same cut rate?
Well, there's no cut. No,
not a cut, an extension. Right. I should say an extension of the existing
current
code.
Rates, right. Because we all know
we're all flip with the terminology. Right. I don't mean it that way.
One of two things is going to happen in January. Either taxes go up or they stay the same. Nobody's getting a cut. If you look at the people that the president continues to try and malign, those people who have been successful small business people, 50% of the individuals who are impacted by a tax hike under the president's proposal get at least 26% of their income from small business sources. And the larger that percentage grows, the more jobs they create, which is why I think you've got a bipartisan majority in the House that says, hey, how silly is that? Why would we want to tax the job creators?
Would it be more courageous, politically courageous, to have the vote up or down on the whole issue of the taxes between now and Election Day?
You better believe it.
Well, see, that's what I mean. Even no matter how you feel about it, whether you're for it or against it, the fact that the American people, they're sort of played on this one. You know, we ought to know where everybody stands for or against before Election Day.
Right. It is adding to the ire and the cynicism that people are pointing towards Washington, when I think most people understand taxes are not a good thing in a recession. And then if you look on the inside and what's going on, most members of Congress support the notion that you ought not hike taxes in a recession. So it does. I think it's not, certainly from a policy standpoint and uncertainty, it's the best thing we could do was to go ahead and pass that bill and make sure people know their taxes aren't going up. And I just, for the life of me, don't understand why they just don't go ahead and do that.
Well, I actually think part of, and this is just my sort of guess on this whole Tea Party movement, is an objection to the process. The fact that, this is an important issue and it's not getting voted on before Election Day makes American people sort of feel like they aren't being heard, whether they're for it or against it. That sort of caused a lot of Americans to speak up.
Well, it's unquestioned that right now the Tea Party is like the tip of the spear as far as the frustration out across this country. People are tired of spending, they're tired in the growth and expanse of government, and they're tired of the politicians making the promises they don't keep.